Why didn't Microsoft fix the bug I care about? Hi everyone, Leo Notenboom here for askleo.com. Here's a question. I've complained about this bug for years and no one has an answer. It's horrible. Forums are full of people who are experiencing this bug and no one has an answer. It's been there for years and Microsoft continues to just ignore us. Obviously, Bill's too busy trying to make more money by forcing us to upgrade and doesn't have time for bugs that impact lots of people. Why won't they fix this horrible bug? I want to be clear here. I am not talking about a specific bug. This is in general about folks who discover something that to them is a horrible, terrible problem, and they just can't understand why it's not fixed immediately. The question above is a composite of questions, comments, and rants that I've received. Every time, someone is convinced that they're dealing with what they consider to be the most important bug ever, and Microsoft, hell, Bill Gates himself, is ignoring him. There's usually no satisfying folks who've landed in this extreme position. I often suggest, and it's an honest suggestion, that they might be better served by using a Mac or Linux because they're so dissatisfied with Microsoft and Windows. For those who are interested, though, I'd like to discuss how companies decide what bugs get fixed and why a bug you consider important might not be one of them. I'll also discuss why Bill Gates is not only not ignoring you, but probably doesn't even know that you, or the bug you care about, even exists. I want to be clear also, this is not about making excuses for Microsoft. They do screw up and miss really important things from time to time. More often than not, it's a case of not clearly understanding the priorities of their users, but even that's no excuse. Sometimes they just get it wrong. Really, this is about understanding the process and the incredible complexity of fixing bugs. Hopefully, we can gain a little understanding of why a bug might not get resolved in a timely fashion or at all. Now, I'm not only not making excuses for Microsoft, this information applies industry-wide. Even though I'll use Microsoft in the discussion, it applies equally to any of 100 other software manufacturers. I also don't want to minimize or gloss over the impact of whatever it is you're experiencing. These problems can have a significant impact on how you use your computer every day. I am taking your experience seriously, as does Microsoft, believe it or not. But I also want to be very, very pragmatic. My goal for you is to understand the realistic chances of getting your issue addressed. Let's look at how companies make decisions about how things work, how they prioritize fixing bugs, and how difficult it is to fix bugs, and maybe even a little bit about who we should blame. Sometimes, just because you don't like something doesn't mean it's a bug. It may annoy the heck out of you, but that doesn't mean it's wrong or accidental. Microsoft does research called usability studies to determine the best way for things to work. They do lots of research. They then update and refine their products based on the feedback from real people who are using the proposed changes long before those changes ever see the light of day. Based on that feedback, many changes never even make it into the product. But there's no pleasing everyone. If 990 people out of 1,000 really like a proposed user interface, and 10 hate it, Microsoft's going to choose the one that pleases the most. If you're one of the 10, you are out of luck. It's not a bug. It's a decision, appealing to the majority of users, a majority of which you, unfortunately, just aren't a part. Now, I'm certain also that there are bugs, actual bugs, in Windows that are decades old and will never be fixed. Why? Because the number of people affected by the bug or the severity of the bug's impact is so small, it's just not important enough to fix. Let's say you find 1,000 people who agree with you on that bug that bugs you the most. The number of Windows installations recently exceeded like 1 billion machines sometime in 2014. It's even higher now. Your 1,000 people represent 0.0001% of Windows users. The fact that 1,000 is a tiny fraction of Windows users isn't enough to get the bug ignored, but it is one factor. Data loss is a more significant factor. One classification assigned to problem reports is the concept of data loss, whether the bug could cause the user to lose data. That could be as simple as a crash that causes you to lose what you're working on right now, or a failure unexpectedly wiping out all or part of the data stored on your hard disk. Data loss matters. If a part of the screen isn't redrawn as it should be, or a mouse pointer disappears for a moment, or an information window closes unexpectedly, those are all less serious than something that causes a user to lose data. So even if thousands of people are experiencing the same problem, that might be tiny compared to all the users who are not. And if the problem is mostly non-destructive, you can see that it might not get as highly prioritized as other issues, including future product and new feature development. One of Windows' most interesting features is its ability to be extended by third-party hardware vendors. Today's version of Windows can work with hardware that hasn't even been dreamed of yet, because when that hardware comes into existence, the manufacturer can write software, aka drivers, that integrates with Windows to support the new device. The key phrase here: the manufacturer can write software that integrates with Windows. Microsoft doesn't write and isn't necessarily responsible for every bit of software used by Windows to run your machine. What that means is that some bugs you might perceive as being in Windows aren't in Windows at all. They're in the software added to Windows by other vendors. Microsoft can and does pass along reports of issues with third-party software, but they don't control how or when or even if those bugs get resolved. They, like you, are at the mercy of those third-party software authors. This isn't limited to drivers. There are third-party applications and add-ons often perceived as part of Windows, even though they are not. Their failure is often reported as about Windows when the fault actually lies elsewhere. Now, one thing that I think is hard to get your brain around sometimes is that fixing a bug, even a simple one, is neither simple nor cheap. Because of the unimaginable complexity of the systems that we now take for granted, the ramification of even the smallest bug fix is often impossible to predict. It's not at all uncommon for a tiny fix over here to break something else over there. Hence, a good software vendor will test even the smallest fix thoroughly. What that means is that the software needs to be run through a complete testing cycle to make sure the fix actually didn't break something else. Now imagine what it means to test every single feature in Windows. Now imagine doing that for every different edition of Windows, Home, Pro, whatever. Now imagine doing it again for every edition in every language. Now imagine trying to do all of that quickly. The upshot is that the cost of even the simplest of bug fixes is surprisingly high. There's an old software engineering maximum that says a bug found by the customers is 10 times more expensive as one found by pre-ship testing. A bug found by pre-ship testing is 10 times as expensive as a bug found by the engineer writing the software. A bug found by the engineer is 10 times as expensive as a bug found in the design before software is even written. What all that really means is that the earlier bugs are found, the less expensive they are to fix. Or conversely, the later they are found, meaning you and I find them when the product is released, the more expensive they are to fix. So you can imagine there's a lot of pressure to fix bugs as early in the development cycle as possible. There are untold thousands upon thousands of bugs that get fixed before the product is ever released. And yet, some make it through regardless. This is the nature of software development. There is no such thing as bug-free software. Period. No exceptions. It's also the nature of the complexity of the system. Honestly, there are days when I'm amazed it works at all. What all this does, though, is it puts software vendors in a no-win situation. We complain about software that takes forever to arrive, and then we complain that the software has bugs. In the real world, those two things are directly at odds with one another. It takes time and discipline to write and test software so that it has as few bugs as possible. Conversely, software that is rushed to market because people are clamoring for it or because the press is pointing fingers is likely to have more than the average number of bugs. We can't have it both ways. Every software release, I don't care who it's from, is a compromise. Engineers always plead for just a few more days to fix a few more bugs. I've been that engineer. And marketing and salespeople complain that every delay results in massive market share or revenue loss. The reality, of course, is somewhere in between. Some releases strike the right balance. Others don't. So, I'm not trying to say that bugs never get fixed. Bugs do get fixed, just not all of them. If you encounter something that isn't working as you expect, look for solutions. There's a tremendous amount of information and resources available on the internet, including, hopefully, askleo. If there are no solutions to be found, report the problem. Just don't get overly frustrated, or try not to get overly frustrated if no fix is forthcoming. And don't immediately jump to the conclusion that your feedback is being ignored. That is highly unlikely. Instead, focus on finding workarounds or ways to avoid the problem. If it really is a bug that is terribly impactful to you, that might mean switching to a different software solution from some other vendor. Now, I got to talk a little bit about Bill. I scratch my head when people rail against Bill Gates for perceived issues with Microsoft or its products. Not sure what it is about Microsoft that causes people to blame Bill personally for all of its faults and failings. Bill hasn't worked directly at Microsoft since 2008, and he left the board of directors in 2020. While he may still be informally advising folks at Microsoft, it's certainly not at the level of individual features and bugs. In other words, Bill Gates is not and never was personally responsible for the features you don't like or the bugs you encounter. Your ire at him? Completely wasted. Bottom line, be pragmatic about the bugs you encounter or the behaviors you don't like. I'm certainly not saying accept everything, but be realistic about what's likely to be fixed or changed to your liking. If you can't or don't like what you're dealing with, look for alternatives that work better for you. For updates, for comments, for links related to this topic and more, visit askleo.com/18480. I'm Leo Notenboom. This is askleo.com. Thanks for watching.